we have an overview of everything we've been going through in the state these past couple decades. So obviously just doing a quick overview of the drought history in Arizona. We have the 2004 Drought Preparedness Plan, I'll be discussing as well. And then Einav will be moving in to discuss the new reporting requirements for water systems, the Drought Preparedness Working Groups, of which there are 3, the Drought Preparedness Annual Report, and the challenges and successes that we've observed since putting the preparedness plan into play. Oops. Now, as it turns out, we live in a desert, so we recognize that drought is a natural occurrence in our climate. So the question really is not if a drought is going to occur, but when it's going to occur. So Arizona has experienced 3 severe and sustained droughts in the 20th century. One in the early 1900s, which was so terrible that it turned the landscape black and white, as you can see here. Just kidding. Just making sure y'all are awake, all right? We had another one in the 1950s, as you can see in that graph there where that blue arrow is pointing, and a current ongoing drought that began in the mid-1990s. Now, scientists such as our state climatologist, Dr. Nancy Sullivan, think that the current drought started in about 1994, so after we had a really wet winter in 93. Even though the onset of each watershed in our state is a bit different, based on statewide rainfall patterns, Arizona has been in a state of drought for over 20 years. Now, about 9 years after the drought had started in 94, in 2003, where I was a junior in high school trying to figure out my life and why girls were so mean and that sort of thing, Arizona was trying to figure out what to do about the drought and said, we should probably be prepared for this sort of thing. So we created the Governor's Drought Task Force in 2003. And then a year later, the Arizona Drought Preparedness Plan was developed and adopted. The principal intent of the task force was to establish a flexible framework to refine how we monitor the drought, better understand drought impacts, and develop mechanisms for limiting future vulnerabilities to drought. And as a result of the plan, the working committees, those 3 working committees I mentioned earlier, were formed, and new water use reporting requirements were established for all water providers. So our department, the Arizona Department of Water Resources, coordinates these activities, and with the help of all drought working committees, we produce each year the Arizona Drought Preparedness Annual Report. So to go into each of these components in a little more detail, Einav is going to hog the spotlight from me.
Sorry, Zack.
That's okay.
Okay, so starting with new requirements for all water systems, or we call them community water systems, that are every water provider that serves 15 connections or 25 year-round residents. So it really can be from an RV park to a larger city. So these reporting requirements came into law in 2000 from the 2004 Drought Preparedness Plan, and all systems were now required to submit 2 documents. One is the annual water use reports, and the second is the 5-year system water plan. So the annual water use reports is really meant for the systems to evaluate how much water they pump or receive and how much water they deliver, to kind of estimate what their future would hold and what their efficiency of their system is looking like. The 5-year system water plan has even more details, and it's divided to 3 specific plans within that system water plan. One is the water supply plan, and looking specifically into the details of water that they use every single month. The second is the drought preparedness plan, and the third is the conservation plan. So all of these come together into the system water plan and needs to be updated every 5 years. So just as an example, and we're here for drought, so talk a little bit about the drought preparedness plan and what it includes. It includes what drought stages they have. Now, we recognize that each system may have a different water portfolio, may have different needs, different customers that they serve with different needs. So we really rely on the system to decide what should be their water level, what should be their drought levels, and what would be the triggers that would put them into the response actions that they again come up with. And just to point out, we do have in our drought plan, we have some response action that identified. However, again, we really rely on the systems because each one can have a really, really diverse and different conditions. And some, by the way, may have restrictions in maybe drought level 3 or 2. Some may not have any restrictions at all, even if they hit the last type of drought. So moving on to our drought working groups, starting with the Monitoring Technical Committee. So this is a committee that comprises of weather, climate, and water resources experts. It's chaired by our state climatologist, Nancy Saliver, as Zack mentioned, and by Mark O'Malley, who is our lead forecaster for the National Weather Service office in Phoenix. They are responsible for gathering all the drought, climate, and weather information and produce the monthly short-term drought status report, as well as the quarterly long-term drought status reports. Both the Monitoring Technical Committee and ADWR, Department of Water Resources, work together to increase the communication and accessibility to drought by water resources, by decision makers, and by the public. And we do so by sending these monthly reports via email to anyone who's interested. And we also have a website that Zack's gonna go over later on that is updated on a weekly basis according to the US Drought Monitor, that, by the way, the MTC provide input for. We also have the monthly updates that we use the last month, the last week of the month US Drought Monitor map, and we incorporate some summary. And again, we send it via email, and we also post these changes on our website. And on a quarterly basis, using the quarterly or the long-term drought status report that incorporates 24, 36, and 48 months percentile data for precipitation and stream flow. Moving on to our next drought working group, and this is our interagency coordinating group. So this is a group of state, federal, and non-governmental organizations that come together twice a year. They started meeting since 2006, and they met constantly twice a year to discuss drought condition, drought status, even wildlife impacts, wildfire situation, outlook for the future. A lot of really, really interesting discussions going on, and really looking at the drought in a very holistic approach, and looking at all the different indicators, or a lot of the different indicators that can tell us the drought situation across the state. Now, their main purpose is to advise the governor and the governor's office on drought situation, possible mitigation action, and also to recommend the governor whether to maintain the 2 drought declarations that we currently have in place in Arizona. By the way, one useful tool that we have to the right of your screen is the Arizona Drought Assistance Metrics, and it lists all the different state and federal agencies that have some sort of a drought resource or tool for different entities. So if somebody was affected by the drought or have some questions about the drought, they can go through this list and see, depending on their sector, on their need, they can see what assistance is out there for them. So moving on to local drought impact groups, or LDIGs, and these are county-based groups that looking more at drought on a local level. On a county level, they're working on monitoring drought and education and local mitigation, and they're usually coordinated by the cooperative extension or the drought emergency management within each county. Now, those local drought impact groups, so initial planning activities since 2004 started with about 10 local drought impact groups. We had about 8 that were active in the past, and currently we have 2 that are active, one in Pima County and one in the Mojave County. So all this information that we gather from the monitoring technical committee from the interagency coordinating group and the local drought impact group, we combine all of this into our Arizona Drought Preparedness Annual Report that comes at the end of every water year since 2006. So it incorporates information such as drought status, changes and updates, the summary that we can see over the past year, some climate and precipitation data, not only statewide, but also on the Colorado River. 40% of our water supply comes from the Colorado River, so that's a very important part for us as well, and water supply status. So all of this information is really to provide a really detailed summary of all the activities that took place in the past year. And it's all available on our website. So anybody who's interested in drought condition, not necessarily last year, but maybe 10 years ago, they can actually find it on our website, including the 2004 Regional Drought Preparedness Plan. So this was a really, really brief summary of how our drought preparedness plan started and what we do every year to maintain this information. We wanted to touch a little bit about some of the challenges that we encounter as we go through throughout the years with drought plan and our program. And the first one is that the drought plan identified all the components that I just mentioned, but it identified them as a recommendation to the governor back in the day. Beside the community water system reporting requirements that became in statute, none of the recommendations made it into law. However, the program's still very active and very relevant, at least a lot of the components. But we realized that if there was some sort of a statutory requirement to update the plan or to revise the plan, we would probably have a little more motivation and political will to do so. And I'm sure our friends in Utah know that it does take a lot of coordination and a lot of effort and probably a lot of resources that, again, if we had it in statute, that would have helped get this plan updated. And of course, even if it has a lot of good information, we're 14 years already into the drought further. So I'm sure there is a lot of new data, a lot of new information that, again, we could incorporate. So without statutory requirements, we also don't have an allocated yearly budget. We still can utilize budget from our general fund, but a lot of other programs are supported by general fund, and there's always programs that may have more urgency or anything like that. So there's always some justification that needs to take place. Just to give you a little ideas of what are some of the topics that the Monitoring Technical Committee and interagency coordinating groups are talking. If we did have that budget, what we could do. So we currently maintain the program, and I think we're doing a relatively good job without having an allocated yearly budget. However, if we had more resources, we could even advance the program more. So a few of the ideas that we have that we would like to at one point is establish and facilitate more local drought impact groups, ideally in each of the 15 counties that we have. Again, I mentioned there were about 10 in the past. Now there are only 2. A lot of change. You really need to identify the champions in each county, and they need some help to get that together, so that would help us a lot. We would also want to improve our data collection abilities if it's scientific methods, so identify and utilize more drought index well, for example. But even simply just increasing our reach to local people on the ground that work in the field, and they have this on-the-ground drought observation. And this is, by the way, just a side note, is that something that we also seen that is a challenge to get to these people that are in the ground. And I think it's been mentioned in one of the previous presentations. It's great that we have all these objective data, but we really would like to vet it with some subjective information from people who see these effects. So these are some of the challenges that we encounter. By the way, of course, we can always increase our public education, going to schools, talking about drought, professional organization, and talking to them about not only drought, but how they can help by conserving water. So these are some of the challenges we have. Let's talk a little bit about some of the successes. So as I mentioned, our monitoring technical committee and interagency coordinating group have met consistently in the past 12 years. Our monitoring technical committee meets every quarter, and our interagency meets twice a year. So they've been very active. They also, again, coordinate with the US Drought Monitor, and there is always these really lively and interesting discussions that come up. So this is really great. Another success that we have is that 700 of the roughly 800 community water systems in the state have submitted completed drought and conservation plan. And even though I mentioned that it is in statute, there is no some sort of a penalty, either a monetary or water restricted penalty if they don't submit it. So to us, it's pretty successful that most of them actually did submit and did it successfully. We have a constant request to be involved and informed on drought information within the state and in local areas. So we currently provide the drought emails, the monthly drought emails, to about 360 people. And we also have, just last month, we had about 1,000 people who accessed our drought web pages. So we see these increase every month. So this is good, but it's not so good because we've had such a long drought. So hopefully, you know, it'll ease, but at least people are aware of that. So that is great that they want to learn more. Another very recent improvement that our state climatologist was able to achieve, and she worked on it in the past several years. Again, talking about research, she could probably done it faster if we had the budget to help her with that. But we transitioned from a watershed-based long-term drought map that really took into account a watershed. We sometimes had maybe 3 or 4 gauges in each county. And we moved to a new long-term drought map that looks into a 4-kilometer grid-based map. So it does give us, and it also takes into account, by the way, many more years of drought history. So it gives us a really good, a much better indicators of our drought information throughout the state. And also it looks into a much longer history, so we have a much better percentile and average in these maps. And finally, we just last year launched a new and improved drought webpage. We had about 38 drought pages inside this drought website, and a lot of the information was scattered around, and we were able to redesign it and reorganize all this information into 8 easy-to-access pages that are very easily navigatable. They extend and contrast depending on what the user is interested in. So I think we have just a few minutes. Zack will just take you through some of the components of the drought webpage that we're pretty proud of.
Darn straight. Very proud of this. In fact, I'm really appreciative of Dave kind of showcasing our website on his PowerPoint slide there, so thanks for the plug. That was cool. So this is the main drought overview page. And we have the weekly report, as Einav mentioned earlier. This is updated automatically with the Drought Monitor. And the monthly report is our short-term report, who the state climatologist writes her report on that to us. And then we also have a statement of a forecast from Mark O'Malley from the National Weather Service. And then the quarterly report is our long-term drought report we put up. Yeah. So if you click on that, you'll get all those paragraphs there that detail the short-term drought conditions. And the long-term drought report is below. And then you can actually click on these to get to a better view of it. Going back, we have our drought resources, everything from national to regional to state resources. So at the national level, you got NIDIS, you have the National Drought Mitigation Center, and then you can go into the drought view created by the University of Arizona. So if you want to get a more local approach, there's always that. And then we have our drought working groups. So you can actually learn more about the monitoring technical committee by going to their page. You have all the information on the members, right? And they're from all kinds of different backgrounds, right? A lot of scientists involved here. And the Interagency Coordinating Group, which meets twice a year. We have all of our meeting summaries posted on here, so you can actually drop down that tab and you can see the whole summary, weather outlook, Colorado River water supply status, presentations, webinar, and then, of course, a recommendation letter to the governor on whether to continue the drought status and declaration or call it off. The local drought impact groups, of which Einav mentioned, are typically every county would be an LDIG, but we have 2 active LDIGs at the moment, which we post on here, Mojave County and Pima County, where Tucson's located. And you can go to their webpage to see more about what they're doing. If you want to learn anything about Arizona drought planning, we have all kinds of background information, all the working committees, water use reporting requirements, the Colorado River Basin drought planning. This is actually more towards our Colorado River management team, so they handle that portion. And then the statewide planning section, they deal with the Water Augmentation Council and the planning area process, and that's basically to look at how we can augment Arizona's water supplies. And then the drought preparedness plan and annual reports are all located here. So the preparedness plan is down at the bottom, and our conservation strategy for 2004. And our latest annual report is a simple PDF click. Anything related to drought facts that, for instance, what is a drought? How does Arizona plan for drought? Is the drought over? Things like this is helpful for people who are just trying to learn more about what drought is. So I think that's all I had for that one. Did you point anything else out?
Maybe you could just click on the resources.
Sure.
You can see how they break down.
So here's all the national resources. The Drought Monitor is on there. The Farm Service Agency, we have on the national level, but we also have it at the local level down here for Arizona. The National Weather Service offices, all 3 of them are located here. We have this cool, I like this drought meter for local drought conditions. That's pretty neat. And the Arizona Water Initiative that I mentioned earlier with the Augmentation Council, all that, publications there as well. If you ever know about Drought View, I think this is a pretty cool tool as well, developed by Mike Crimmins. And so he has all sorts of maps here. And they used to be able to look up certain reports in the area, and you could click on it and figure out what was going on in that area of the map. Anything else?
No. So that's pretty much the end of our presentation. I know there is a lot of federal agencies. If there is any tool that you have, sorry.
Yeah.
Am I on? Awesome.
There you go.
I wanted just to mention that if there is any resource that you have that is not included there, we try the best to include any drought resource that we can think of. Please let us know. We'll be more than happy to incorporate it into our webpage, and we would love people to utilize it if possible. Also, just mentioning thank you for having us here. We're really looking forward to hearing about other states and about Utah's efforts, and we hope that at least some of it was helpful in your efforts. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.